Welcome to Crazy Nurse RN Hub, where learning becomes a tradition. Come, join me as we explore the multifaceted worlds of nursing.
Again, good morning everyone. So today we will be discussing about the 5 qualitative approaches to inquiry. Okay, so I know that you have already discussed this when you have your nursing research course or subject in Master of Arts in Nursing. Okay, just a quick review. So I'll be discussing here more on the procedures and how to conduct a particular qualitative approach. Okay, so but first let's define what is a qualitative study. So when we say qualitative study, it is an inquiry beyond numbers. Okay, so there is a great difference between a quantitative and a qualitative study. When we say quantitative study, it refers to numbers, it refers to statistics, it refers to numerical values. But when we say qualitative study, we are dealing here with narratives, stories, experiences, words. Okay, these are your qualitative study. Okay, that's why we have your content analysis, because we analyze the content of the transcripts, the statements of your participants. Okay, by the way, when you make a qualitative study, we usually address our subject as participants. Okay, because they participate in the study. They are considered as co-researchers. Okay, participate sila sa study nga. That's why we address them as participants. And also, it deals with the dynamics of life. Okay, so when we say dynamics of life, that means life is changing. Change is constant. Okay, in your quantitative study, it is fixed. It is the absolute truth because you have the numbers. Okay, however, in your qualitative study, it keeps on changing. Okay, that means my story is not the same as yours. Okay, and his story is not the same as hers. Okay, so that means it keeps on changing. Okay, that's why ang inyong qualitative study pwede siya flexible. Okay, it is flexible, it is changing. And also, we have your phenomenological or interpretive inquiry. So later, I'll be discussing about phenomenology. And of course, this qualitative study involves finding meanings and concepts. Okay? Kung sa quantitative study, ang ginapangita taya is like significant difference, mga amo na siya, significant relationship. Here in your qualitative study, what we are after is it's about finding meanings. Okay? Ano ang meaning sa eksperyensya niya? Okay, sa isa ka tawo, ano ang meaning sina? Okay? So we are after to that meanings. The essences, okay, amo na siya. And also, we are after here in generating concepts. Okay? For example, if you want to generate a theory, okay, so you generate a concept. Okay? So that's your qualitative study. So that's just a quick introduction of your qualitative study. So we have here your 5 qualitative approach to inquiry. So we'll be discussing about narrative study. Okay, so as what I have mentioned earlier, we'll be dealing here with stories, okay, of each individual. And ethnography, okay, if you want to study a particular ethnic group, okay, of ethnic group, so you can do ethnography. Case study, if you want to deal with a particular case study in depth, okay, this is an extensive data collection methodology because we are examining one person's case. Okay, so all aspects should be examined and determined. And also we have here grounded theory. Okay, this is I believe, an extensive method of qualitative study because we are generating a theory here. Okay, we are generating a theory and discovering a theory. And lastly, we have your phenomenology, which I believe is the most common methodology na ginagamit sa mga students in making a qualitative study. So I believe may ara ka mo idea on how these particular qualitative approaches works. Okay? So first, let's discuss about a narrative study. Okay? So as what I have said, it deals with its story. It deals with stories. Okay, that means my story matters. Okay, my story matters. So we have here your narrative. So it is a spoken or written text giving an account of an event, action, or series of events, actions chronologically connected. Okay? So that means when we say narrative, that means it is a way of, you are narrating, okay, the stories of your participants. Gina-narrate mo ang stories ng participants mo. Pero hindi lang amo na. You have to also identify the patterns, chronological order. So dapat pag narrate mo sa ilang stories, dapat naka-chronological order. Okay? Initially, during the interview, may interview ka sa imong participant, these are not arranged chronologically, hindi na siya pasunod. So what you will do as a researcher is you have to read through the interview transcripts of your participants. Then you look into patterns. You look into phases, you look into stages, kung paano mo na siya i-arrange. Then that's the time, once you have identified ang patterns, ang chronological order niya, that's the time you narrate that, or you have to retell or re-story the stories of your participants. Okay? So very important concept here in your narrative is you have to arrange that chronologically, and it should be connected to one another. The events should be connected to one another. And it focuses on studying one or two individuals, gathering data through the collection of their stories, reporting individual experiences, and chronologically ordering or using life course stages the meaning of those experiences. So as you noticed here, ang gina-require lang gid sa inyong narrative. So if you want to study about narrative inquiry or narrative study, so you will be needing one or two individuals. Gamay lang gid ang participant mo. Okay? So siguro mas okay kung tatlo lang ang participants mo. Okay? Actually, in your qualitative study, we do not have a fixed number of participants. Okay? It depends on the type of your qualitative study nga gamiton mo. Okay? Sa imong research. But if you will use a narrative study, okay, so kung nabudlayan ka mangita participant, so probably diri ka sa narrative. Kay gamay lang gid ang kinahanglan mo. So one or two individuals or three individuals ang kinahanglan mo. But you have to make sure that you have to set ang imo nga inclusion criteria. So ano dapat ang mga characteristics, ano dapat ang mga characteristics ng imo nga participants nga kwaon. Okay? Because the quality and ang kanami, blasing qualitative study depends on the participants that you purposively choose. Okay? So, amo na siya qualitative. So, you have one or two individuals or probably three participants, that would be fine. Nga one or two or tatlo lang participants ang kinahanglan mo sa narrative study. Because you need to have an in-depth, okay, description and analysis of their stories. Okay? Kaya kung damo imo nga participants, meaning ang imo na ang analysis per participants, hapaw lang or tama lang ka broad. Okay? So dapat gamay lang sila so that you can focus in terms of their experiences, in terms of their stories. Okay, para ma-cover mo. Okay? And the technique that we use here in your narrative story is retelling or restorying. Okay, as what I have said, basahon mo tong ilang interview transcripts. Okay, then you look for patterns, you look for chronological events or sequencing. Then that's the time you narrate. Okay, i-restory mo or i-retell mo. So, amo ang magsulat sa imong chapter 4. Okay, da ka masalat sa chapter 4 mo. So, basically, ang unod sa imong chapter 4 when you make a narrative study, mostly are narratives. Okay, like for example, story number 1 or story of participant number 1. Okay, Mrs. 8 years old. It's like you're writing a story. Okay, first you have to introduce the participants. Okay, age, din siya work and all, if it is needed. Then you start with the narratives of your participants. So basically, stories lang gid na iya ang unod sa imong chapter 4. Okay? But it is constructed in chronological. It is constructed chronologically. So here are the procedures for narrative research. So this is according to Clandinin and Conley 2000. Okay, so this is just a general steps in making your narrative study. But you know what? In making a qualitative study, the first thing that you should do is to look for a methodology. Okay, damo-damo na methodology. Methodology. So usually ang name sa mga methodology are the author's name man. Okay? So after mo binaka-identify ka sang topic mo, you have decided kung anong type of qualitative study, then you look for possible methodology nga gamiton mo sa imong study. Okay, there are a lot of methodology under your narrative research. One of them is from Clandinin and Connelly 2000. Okay? So iya naman diyang methodology or the steps nga pag-ubra sa narrative research. First is you have to determine if the research problem or question best fits for a narrative research. So if you want to study about stories, so probably you will choose narrative research. If you want to have an in-depth, okay, analysis of the experiences and stories of the participants, you would choose narrative research. Okay, it depends on your research problem. It depends on the intention. It depends on your objective, on your problem. Okay, so very important. Usually mag pre-oral defense, the panelists would question you nga aamuni nga design ang gamit mo. Okay, you have to really defend that nga aamuna siya. Because, you know, may makita ka nga mga problems, okay, you would usually see problems nga qualitative study siya. Pero ang methodology nga paggamit isala. Okay, so hindi siya pwede. Okay, so make sure that sa first step diri is you really have to make sure that the research problem or your research question best fits the narrative research. Okay? So, na usually ang focus sa inyong pre-oral defense in qualitative study if the methodology is best suited sa imong research. Okay? Next, select one or more individuals who have stories or life experiences to tell and spend considerable time with them gathering their stories through multiple types of information. Okay? So, there are a lot of ways to collect data from your participants. You can do interviews. Okay? You can ask them to write a reflection. Okay? Pasulatan mo sila reflection that could be part of the stories. Or you can let them draw. Okay? Pa-draw mo sila. Okay? That could be also part of the stories. You'll really have to interpret those. So there are a lot of ways. You can also observe. Okay? Through observation, you can observe their facial features. Okay? During the interview, kung gasubo sila, kung na-happy, di man sila, ilang verbal and non-verbal gestures. Okay, you can use that one. That can be part of your stories. Okay, so there are a lot of ways on how to collect data from your participants. Collect information about the context of these stories. So by way of using multiple types of data collection methodology. And analyze the participants' stories and then restory them into a framework that makes sense. Okay? So, ang mga ginahambal ko sa inyo, na once na-analyze mo na ang transcripts, okay, so ang interview niyo, you analyze, then after that, you restory or you retell or you narrate that stories, making sure that you follow a particular framework, like for example, a chronological order or a particular sequence, okay, so events. And after that, you collaborate with the participants by actively involving them in research. So what is good about a qualitative study is you really involve the participants in the study. Hindi parehas plus sa quantitative, mahatag ka questionnaire, receive mo ang questionnaire, bahala na participants, wala na. But in your qualitative study, once you have done your interview at initially, kung may kulang pa, you can actually go back, okay, sa participants. Okay? If you want to clarify something sa imong transcripts, ma'am, ano ginanamin mo ni? So you can actually go back sa imong participants. Okay? So, sometimes daw friends na inyo, balang nga sa participant, daw friends na kamo sa participants. Okay? Because of this collaboration. This is to make sure nga tsakto gidman ang data nga na-collect mo from your participants. Okay? Then after you are done with the transcript, you have the results already, you have the findings of your narrative study, mabalik ka na Japon sa imong participants. Okay? Kung magbalik ka sa imong participants, you have to let them check kung sakto imong analysis, kung sakto ang imong interpretation. Okay? Then if they agree nga sakto ang imong nga analysis, so that's the time you can proceed sa next stage. Okay? Sometimes may araga katabo nga may mga sala bala, okay? May mga na misunderstood, may mga sala nga na input ang researcher, wala siya ga-reflect sa experiences or sa stories ng imong participants. So you have to change that. Okay? I-change mo na siya. Then after changing that, after modifying that, you present it again sa imo nga participants until such time nga mag-agree na siya, kag mag-okay na siya, nga that really reflects their experiences and their stories. Okay? This is to make sure that credible ang imo nga study, nga tsakto gid man ang imo nga ginubra nga study. Okay? So that's another way of, of looking into the credibility and the trustworthiness of your study, of your qualitative research. Okay? So that's your narrative research. Okay? So remember, you narrate, you retell, you re-story in a chronological manner. Next topic or next type of your qualitative study is your ethnography. Okay, so from the word itself, it focuses on the entire cultural group. Okay, so if you want to study about a particular ethnic group or cultural group, so you would probably use or you would probably utilize your ethnography. So it describes and interprets the shared and learned patterns of values, behaviors, beliefs, and language of a culture-sharing group. Okay? So remember, values, behaviors, beliefs, and language. If you want to study those aspects in a particular group or ethnic group, so you can use your ethnography. Okay? So make sure na dapat ang imong ang ethnic group dugay na siya. Okay? For example, like mga years na bala naka-establish na sila. Okay? Because in that way, naka-share na sila sa ila culture. Okay? That means may ara na sila nga established patterns. Whereas, to those ethnic groups nga bago pa lang na-established, so basically, wala pa na sila ka-establish ang patterns ng ilang culture din. So, hindi ka na mag-study. Okay? Study ka sa mga ethnic groups nga naka-establish na, kagdugay na, because they already shared the same culture na. Okay? And that's a best fit for your ethnography. Okay? Then, in your ethnography, we use participant observation. So, we immerse with the ethnic group. Okay? So, bakadto, kaginatid to. Okay? You observe, you talk to the participants, you live with them. Okay? You immerse with them. So, studying the meaning of the behavior, the language, and the interaction among members of the culture-sharing group. Okay? So, amo lang ni ang lawig ni siya actually ang ethnography, okay? Because you want to have an in-depth analysis of their culture, of their beliefs, of their practices, and so on. Okay? So, dapat ara kaginatid to. So, however, ang problem diri sa ethnography, usually, ang mga researchers bala wala katapos ang ilang nga study because they tend to attach sa mga ethnic groups emotionally. Okay? Sometimes, nakakita sila sa ilang asawa or sometimes, na emotionally attached sila sa mga members ng group nga na. So, that would be a challenge sa mga researchers. Okay? So, amo lang din na ang lantawon dira because there is a tendency nga maging emotionally attached ka sa mga people in that particular ethnic group because you live with them. So, here are the procedures for ethnography. This is according to Walcott, 1999. So, first, we have to determine if your study is best fit for ethnography. Okay? And after that, you have to identify and locate a culture-sharing group of study. Okay, so as what I have said, ang pilion mo nga culture, nga ethnic group, ang established na, ang dugay na. Because they already share the same culture. And they have established the same patterns of their practices and beliefs. And also, you have to select cultural themes or issues to study about the group. And to study cultural concept, determine which type of ethnography to use. Okay, there are actually types of ethnography. Okay. So we will not discuss the different types of ethnography. This is just to present to you the procedures in making your ethnography and gather information where the group works and lives. That's why we need immersion. We immerse with them. We live with them. And forge a working set of rules or patterns as the final product of this analysis. So you look into the patterns, kung ano ang discover mo in terms of their culture. Okay? So that's the outcome, that's the result of your study. Okay? So that's your ethnography. Next types of your qualitative study is your case study. Okay? So it involves the study of an issue explored through one or more cases within a bounded system. and it explores a bounded system, a case, for example, or a multiple bounded systems or cases over time through detailed, in-depth data collection involving multiple sources of information. You can do observation, interviews, audiovisual material, and documents and reports, and reports a case description and a case-based themes. Okay? So in terms of the number of participants, the same ni siya sa imo nga narrative study. Okay, gamay lang gina sila. You might have 1, 2, or 3 case study. Because what you are after here is the detailed, in-depth data collection processes. Okay? So usually, ang case studies are usually used by medical students or medical professionals like doctors, nurses, if they want to have a case of a particular patient. Okay? For example, a patient with Parkinson's disease, a patient with Alzheimer's disease. Okay? So they will establish a parameter or a bounded system dira kung ano lang ilang study yan. Okay? So for example, you would study Parkinson's disease. Specifically, you would want to study the behaviors of the Parkinson's disease. Okay? So that is a parameter na studyhan mo lang. And sa amuna nga behaviors ng imong Parkinson's disease, you will have a detailed and in-depth data collection. Okay? Kaya kung damuon mo imo nga scope sa imo nga case study, like for example, you will study the behavior, you would study their physical attributes, you would study their psychological affectation, so that would be too much na sa imo. And you would not have an in-depth and detailed collection data nga i-collect mo dira. Okay? So in your case study, you actually examine here a particular case through an in-depth and detailed data collection processes. Okay? So that's your case study. So we have here a lot of sources of information. How do we collect data? Okay? So if you think you want to study that, so we can use case study. Okay? So what are the procedures for case study? This is according to Stake 1995. So first, you have to determine if your research problem, your research question, best fit the case study methodology. Okay? Researchers next need to identify their case or cases. Then after that, the data collection in case study research is typically extensive, drawing on multiple sources of information. So remember, the data collection is extensive because we want an in-depth and detailed results and detailed description of the experiences of a particular individual. And the type of analysis of these data can be historic analysis of the entire case or an embedded analysis of the specific aspect of the case. And if in the final interpretive phase, the researcher reports the meaning of the case, whether that meaning comes from learning from the issue of case, that's your instrumental case, or learning from an unusual situation, intrinsic case. So the end product usually of your case study is you learned a particular lesson. Okay? May nabalaan ka nga sa particular realization, a particular learnings out of the case of your patient. So amo lang end product sa imong case study. Okay? So what do you learn from out of this case? Ano nabalaan mo sa amo nga case? Okay? So that's your case study methodology. Next is the grounded theory, and I believe though gamay lang ni ang naga-ubra sa grounded theory because, you know, in making a grounded theory, tama siya ka-extensive because you are actually you are generating or discovering a theory. Okay? Remember that a theory is, you know, it describes a particular group of people using a particular process. Okay? So the researcher generates a general explanation theory of a process, action, or interaction shaped by the views of a large number of participants. Okay? Since you are generating a theory, which means you want to explain a particular process, action, interaction nga aga katabo ina sa particular group of people, so you will be needing a large number of participants. Okay? Kaya hindi mo pwede nga duwa lang katawo ang kinahanglan mo, then maubra ka na theory. Because ang theory ng obrahon mo will be true lang sa duwa lang katawo. It will not be true sa group of people. So that's why we need a larger number of participants in making your grounded theory. And the participants would all have experienced the process. And the development of the theory might help explain practice or provide a framework for further study. Okay? So, make sure na kung mag-choose ka sang participants in your grounded theory, dapat they are experiencing the same processes. Okay? In order for you to generate a theory out of that particular group of people who are experiencing that process, that phenomenon, for example. Okay? Like, for example, if you want to study about the Paulinian brand of care, okay? So probably you would look for a lot of number, you would probably look for a larger number of participants. You would ask nurses, you would ask medtechs working in a Paulinian institution, you would ask doctors working in a Paulinian institution, you would ask patients who were admitted or who are confined in St. Paul's, for example, in a Paulinian hospital. Okay? You have to collate all these experiences, ilang participants, and you would make a theory about the Paulinian brand of care. Ano giman bala ang Paulinian brand of care? Okay? Based on the different perspectives of participants. Then from that, you could make a theory. Okay? Kung ano ang Paulinian brand of care. The Paulinian brand of care is an example of your process. Okay? And you want to generate a theory kung ano ang Paulinian brand of care. Okay? So that's why you are needing a lot or a greater or larger number of participants. So here is the procedure for grounded theory research. So first, you have to determine, okay, if the grounded theory methodology is best suited to your study or to your research problem. Of course, if you want to generate a theory, then you would go into grounded theory. Then the research questions that the inquirer asks of the participants will focus on understanding how individuals experience the process and identifying the steps in the process. So you would know ano ang proseso, what is your you would know how individuals experience the process. So amo siya, you would do this through interview, okay? So pamangkoton mo, and you have to identify the process. And these questions are typically asked in interviews. Although other forms of data may also be collected, like observation, you can use observation. You can have a retrieval of documents and audiovisual materials, okay, through pictures, through audio materials, okay? And the analysis of data proceeds in stages. So we have stages in making your grounded theory. The first stage is after you have collected the interviews, na-collect mo na ang mga data mo, interviews, data, observations, audiovisual materials, you will go first, initially have the open coding. Open coding, kan-anay. So in here, the researcher forms categories of information about the phenomenon being studied by segmenting information. So what you would do is you would group, okay, similar responses. I-group mo na ang similar responses. Then once you have grouped similar responses or common responses, you would generate a category. Okay? So usually we use that mga sub-themes, amo na gina-categorize mo na sila. That's how you would perform, or that's how you would do open coding. Then after that, after the open coding, you would have your eggshell coding. Okay? The investigator assembles the data in new ways after open coding. So sa eggshell coding mo out of the categories that you have, you will make a model. Okay? Maobra ka na asang model. So sa imo na nga model, that would explain why a particular process is going on. Okay? So there is more of analysis and interpretation sa imo nga eggshell coding. Okay? You are making a model. Then once you're done with the eggshell coding, you would go in. You would do selective coding. Okay, the researcher may write a storyline that connects the categories. So naga-theory making ka na. Okay, pang-connect mo na ang tanan to nga na-identify mo ng mga categories and make a particular theory and generate a theory. Okay, this is very extensive siya. Okay, nga proseso, because we need to be careful of the things that we need to include, okay, from the participants' responses. Okay? Then finally, the researcher may develop and visually portray a conditional matrix that elucidates the social, historical, and economic conditions influencing the central phenomenon. And the result of this process of data collection analysis is a theory, okay? And a substantive level theory written by a researcher close to a specific problem or population of group. Okay? So basically, ang theory mong obrahon is applicable to the particular group of people. Okay? So, for example, as ako itong maging example, sa una, nga Paulinian brand of care, so nakaobra ka na theory, so that theory is true sa tanan nga mga Paulinians, okay, that is true sa tanan nga mga Paulinian hospitals, for example, kasi nga mga hospital, nga brand of care. Okay? So, amo ni ang brand of care sa Iloilo, amo man ni ang brand of care sa iban nga mga St. Paul's nga mga institution or hospital. Okay? So, that could describe their ways of how they care for their patient. Okay? So, by the way, before you make your final theory or the final step in your grounded theory, you need to apply first ang theory sa other group naman. Okay? So, ang ibang nga group lang wala mo na select sa participants, i-apply mo na ang theory mo if it's still the same. Okay? I-apply mo imo you will do the same nga proseso sa pag-ubra sa grounded theory. If the result is still the same, that means you confirm yang imo nga theory nga ginubra initially is the same sa theory nga ginubra mo sa ika-second mo nga participants. Okay, you have to compare. That is your discriminant sampling. Okay? Discriminant sampling. So, imagine nag-ubra ka na sa imo nga research at initially, then maubra ka pagid sa another group just to confirm if the theory is still the same. Okay? So, tama siya ka-extensive because we are making a theory here. Okay? So, tama siya kabudlay and it is time-consuming when you make a grounded theory. Okay? That's why makita mo na ang mga theorists sa nursing, okay, do mga, sila, di ba? Do mga oldies na sila, do tigulang na sila, and they kept on searching pa Japan, okay, in making a theory, especially in theory ni Watson, if you're familiar with the caring theory. Okay? So, it is extensive. Damo na siya nga naagyan ng mga processes in order to prove that it is really a theory of caring in nursing. Okay? So that's your grounded theory. Phenomenology, okay? So I believe this is the last part of our discussion sa inyong different types or different approaches of your qualitative study. So we will discuss this in depth, okay? Because most of you siguro amo ni kwaon yung type of study. So what is phenomenology? Its primary objective is the direct investigation and description of phenomena as consciously experienced. Explicate the structure or essence of the lived experiences of a phenomenon in the search of unity of meaning. Okay? So that means we have here searching for unity of meaning. Okay? So you have participants, okay? May mga participants ka. Then each participant has a particular experience. Okay, may experiences sila. So, ang obrahon mo is you have to group those experiences, i-categorize mo mga experiences mo, then you look for commonalities, okay, then you categorize. That's your themes. Okay, that means that is the unity of their experiences. So, we have here methodological interpretations. So in your phenomenology, actually, there are a lot of methodologies or damo sang mga methods nga pwede nyo magamit. First, and the common method that you would use in phenomenology is the method of colysis. That's in 1978. So ang method ni colysis, we have the 7 procedural steps. Okay? So here is, in this picture, amo ni siya ang 7 procedural steps ni colysis. First, there is transcripts. Okay? First, the researcher read and reread the transcripts over and over again to grasp the whole sense of the transcripts. Okay? Basahon niya na pasulit-sulit. Then you will be identifying the significant statements. Okay? After you have read the transcript, you have to identify the significant statements. Okay? Because kung kisabala sa interview naton, nagka-carried out kita, okay? Sometimes we are asking ang aton nga mga participants hindi na related sa ginahambal ta, okay? So by reading your transcript, pwede mo na siya ma-separate ang mga non-significant ng mga statement from the significant statement. Okay? Once you have identified the significant statement, ipang-group-group mo na sila. Okay? Once you have grouped the significant statement, you would now make a formulated meaning. Okay? So you look for the meaning, ano ba silingon sa mga significant statements ni sa mga participants mo. Then you formulate the meaning. Then after that, we have the aggregation of the formulated meanings. So you make a categories, i-categorize mo na ang formulated meanings mo, you cluster the themes and the themes. Okay? Ma-generate ka na sa mga themes mo. So, ang technique mo lang actually sa phenomenological study is i-group mo ang common. Then you look for a particular themes or a particular concept, for example, that would describe that clustered significant statements or formulated meanings. Then you have to integrate all the resulting ideas. So once you have the themes, okay, you have the sub-themes, for example, or the themes man, i-integrate mo na sila. Then you look for common naman sa imong mga themes. Okay, ano naman ang common sa imong themes? Okay, you would analyze, you would interpret what is common sa imong themes. So that is your exhaustive description of the phenomenon. Okay? Then after that, you proceed to the reduction of the exhaustive description. Okay? So, once you're done with the exhaustive description, lantawon mo dayon liwat ang imo mga transcripts. Okay, lantawon mo liwat ang mga significant statements mo, lantawon mo liwat ang mga formulated meanings mo, basi may mga errors pa dira or may mga hindi kinahanglan ibutang, okay, nga mga statements. Kag may mga statements nga wala gyud man actually naga-define bala sa imong themes, okay? So you can remove that. Okay, pwede mo siya makuha in this process sa imong reduction of the exhaustive description. Okay, pangwaon mo na siya. Okay? Kumbaga dogwaya is double checking. Okay? Then once you have double checked the themes, the sub-themes, then you proceed to the fundamental structure. You will make the final themes, okay, or the final structure of your study. Then once you're done with your findings, your study, na formulate mo na tanan mga themes, okay, may mga themes ka na, then you return to the participants. Mabalik ka sa imong mga participants, you show them the result of your study, you ask for their confirmation if it really reflects their own experiences. Okay? So that's the validation of the exhaustive description, its fundamental structure. Okay? So kung may problema or hindi sila agree sa imong mga findings and result, you have to revise it. Okay, you go through again with the process. Okay, liwaton mo basi may mga sala ka lang nga na-interpret. Okay? So that's how you do your colysis phenomenological data analysis. Okay? We also have your Georgie 1985. May 7 procedural steps na siya. You can use also this. Patterson, Denard, Durand, 1976. May ara siya nga 5 procedural steps. Van Kam, 1984. Si Van Manen, okay, Strubert, 1991. So you can actually use these methodologies, okay, in making your phenomenological study, depending on the topic or depending on your availability kung ano ang bagay sa imo. Okay? But these procedures common man Japan sa tanan. At the end of the day, what you are after is to determine the phenomenon under study of that particular group. Okay? So you can use this one. Damo pa na actually, damo pa na nga mga methodological. If you want to search sa internet or sa mga phenomenological nga mga books, you can see a lot of methodological framework or methodologies in making your phenomenology. But I personally used, when I made my thesis way back in my master's degree, I used the colysis phenomenological analysis. Okay, amo siyang gingamit ko. We have here the 6 core steps in phenomenological investigation. So first, we have your descriptive phenomenology, phenomenology of essences, phenomenology of appearances, constitutive phenomenology, and reductive phenomenology. And lastly, we have your hermeneutic phenomenology. Okay? So again, I am actually discussing here the chapter 3 of your uh, of your of your thesis. Okay? Usually amo ning unod sang chapter 3 mo if you will conduct a phenomenological study. Okay? So the descriptive phenomenology, we have the three-step process. First is intuiting. Okay? Intuiting. So when we say intuiting, becoming totally immersed in the phenomenon, begins to know about the phenomenon as described by the participants, and the researcher serves as the instrument or the research tool, okay, in your phenomenology. So when we say intuiting, it's the feeling that you are actually listening to the experiences of your participants. You become totally immersed with the experience of the participants. Okay? As if you are there sa ila experience while they are sharing their stories, for example, or experiences. Next, we have your analyzing. Okay? So in your analyzing, once you have immersed in the phenomenon, once you have immersed in the transcripts, for example, nabasa mo na ilang stories or transcripts ng ilang interview, you are now to analyze their transcripts. So you identify the essence of the phenomenon by way of looking into common themes. Ilan tawon mo ang mga common nga themes sa ila. Okay? Or the essence begin to emerge. Okay, that's where we have our clustering, categories, sub themes, and themes. Then after that, describing, written and verbal description. So we have to classify all critical elements or essences that are common. Actually, your describing is concurrently happening when you do intuiting and analyzing. Okay? So while you are intuiting, naga-describe ka man dira, in analyzing, naga-describe ka man dira. We use describing process. Okay? So these are the three-step process of descriptive phenomenology. Now let's proceed to phenomenology of essences. Okay? So probing technique. Okay? So probing technique. So what is probing technique? It is to gain insights into the essential structures and relationship among phenomena, exploring the richness of the participants' experience in breadth and in depth. Okay? So probing is a very important technique that you should master in doing interviews with your participants. Okay? So una-una na for example, in presenting your research sa pre-oral defense, okay? You will be asked to present a sample guide questions. Okay? So usually for expert phenomenologists bala or experts sa qualitative study, wala na sila yung guide questions. Okay? Because what they do is this probing technique. Okay? They would only have one question sa participants, then out of that one question, i-probe na dayon nila. So how do you do probing? So for example, you would ask your participants how it is like to be a nurse, how it is like to be a frontliner in this time of COVID pandemic. Okay? So amo lagi ng isa mo ka question, then your participants will respond. So based on the response of your participants, that's the time you probe. So why do you think, okay, how would you do that? Paano mo na mahambal, ma'am? Paano mahambal, sir? Can you describe something? Okay? So, something like that. Okay? Amo na siya mag-probe ka. Okay? But maybe for you, na, you know, like for example, beginners on this qualitative study, the panelists would actually require you to have a guide questions. Okay, maobra ka mo na guide questions. Mga 3 to 5 guide questions, okay na na. Okay? Kaya kung mag-interview na ka mo, you will not look into the guide questions. I-memorize mo na ang guide questions mo and you ask first an initial, a broad question to your participants, then that's the time you probe. Okay? Kaya sometimes, sa isa mo na ka-question, basi ma-answer na nila ang the rest mo nga question. Okay? And also, in your qualitative study, when you do interviews, make sure that it should be a conversational interviews. Okay? Hindi siya nga daw tama, siya ka-structured, na daw ka-formal. Okay? Because kung tama siya ka-formal, ka-structured, tendency is ang imong participants ang imong participants, maano man siya, ma-nervyos man siya, bala ma-uncomfortable man siya. So kung mag-uncomfortable imong participants, he or she will not give you a vivid and a full description of his or her experience. So itaguo niya ng iba niya nga experience, kinakulbaan siya sa imo, kaya hindi siya open. Okay? So as much as possible, dapat daw more of a friendly conversation, language siya, okay? To make the participants at ease and comfortable during the entire session of the interview. Okay? So, but before, what I did is, sa first ko na nga meet up, initially sa participants, wala ko nag-interview. Nag-introduce ko na sa akong self. It's like a more of rapport building. Okay? Then, I introduce the purpose, introduce ko ang topic, nga ma'am, amo ni ang question ko sa imo, para at least, mabalaan niya na balak na maka-prepare siya kung anong iya nga i-share sa imo. Okay? So that ma-recall niya, okay? Ma-recall niya kung anong ihambal niya sa imo. Okay? So usually ang first na nga meet up mo sila or nga pag meet mo sa ila, usually more of a rapport building. Then after 3 days, so tagaan nyo siya, usually 3 to 5 days nga gap from the actual interview so that they could think sa 3 to 5 days nga na kung ano ang mga things nga i-share nila sa imo. Kag makapanumdum sila kung anong i-share nila sa imo. So that you would gain an in-depth and comprehensive description of their experiences. Okay? Then after that, you would do your actual interview. Okay? So that's your probing technique. Okay? So again, I highly recommend you to make a guide questions, okay, beforehand when you will be making a qualitative study. Just a guide lang sa inyo. Guide lang sa inyo when you do interviews. Okay? Then after that, phenomenology of appearances. Okay? When we say phenomenology of appearances, it focuses attention on the phenomenon as it unfolds through dwelling with the data. Can heighten the sense of inexhaustibility of the perspective through which our world is given. Okay? So this is more on the interpretation stage or interpretation phase of your phenomenological study. Okay? So in interpretation, in interpreting your phenomenological study, you should not focus on one aspect lang. Okay? You should focus on the different angles on how the data presents itself. Okay? So dapat when you are a phenomenologist or a qualitative researcher, you must be open, okay, to a lot of possibilities. Okay? Hindi mo siya paghihinder ang imo nga thinking into just one perspective. Okay? Lantawon mo. Pagbasa mo sa transcript, you look for different angles, you look for possibilities, you look for different interpretations of the data that you have. Okay? So that's phenomenology of appearance. You look into how the data appears itself. Okay? Next is constitutive phenomenology. So the process in which the phenomena take shape in our consciousness as we advance from first impression to a full picture of the structure. So it can develop the sense of dynamic adventure in our relationship with the world. Okay? So in your constitutive phenomenology, so what we do here is out from the transcripts, okay, sa imong participants, we get significant statements. After we have grouped the significant statements, we make a formulated meanings. Then after that, after grouping the formulated meanings, we make sub-themes or themes. Then after that, we look into the whole picture of the themes. Okay, ginalantaw tayo yun ang ano meaning sini sa tanan nga ni. Okay? That's taking or determining the full picture of the phenomenon or the structure. Okay? So ang imo niyang na phenomenology is an inductive, okay? Inductive siya na way of generating data. Okay? Next is reductive phenomenology. Okay? So this is a very critical step for the preservation of the objectivity in the phenomenological method. So researcher continually addresses personal biases, assumptions, and presuppositions or set aside these beliefs to obtain the purest description of the phenomenon under investigation. Or we call that the bracketing technique. So we apply the theory of tabula rasa, okay, the blank slate. Okay, so when we say tabula rasa, that means we are born in this world knowing nothing. Okay, wala kita may nabalaan. So the same theory or the same principle applies to your reductive phenomenology. Okay, so make sure na during the interview sa inyong participants, you do not impose your own knowledge to them, okay, or your own experience to them. For example, ang imo nga study is about spiritual care, okay? And you are a nurse. So, expectedly, may ara ka nga knowledge regarding spiritual care. So, during the interview, dapat na pang bracket mo na ng imo nga experiences, imo nga knowledge sa spiritual care so that you would not impose that during the interview. Kaya ang tendency is, ang participants mo, once nga mag-comment ka man dira about spiritual care, ang imo na nga participants would actually go to man sa imo nga experiences. Meaning, ang inyong nastoryahan dira is ang imo nga experiences as a researcher, not the experiences of the participants. Okay? So that's why bracketing is very important before you proceed or before you go to interviews, okay, sa imo nga participants. Okay? So first off, before ka makatuda, i-bracket mo na nga daan ng tawon mo nga ano ang nabalaan ko, dapat hindi ko ni pag-ihambal during the interview, dapat hindi ko pagtagaan ng participants ko sang knowledge about this because this could destroy his or her experiences. Okay? So, i-bracket mo. Just ask questions about spiritual care as if you do not know about spiritual care. Okay? So, that's how you do your phenomenology interviewing. Then, next, we have your hermeneutic phenomenology. Okay? So it is the philosophy of interpretation. So a special kind of phenomenological interpretation designed to unveil otherwise conceal the meanings in the phenomena. So bracketing of the researcher's bias is not required. So sa hermeneutic naman niya, this is more of the interpretation of the transcripts of your participants. Okay? So for example, you're done with the interview. Okay, may ara ka na transcripts, kinabasa mo. Then the topic is about spiritual care. Then you are a nurse. So expectedly, may ara kang knowledge about spiritual care. So you can actually impose your knowledge in the interpretation of the transcripts of your participants. Okay, that's your hermeneutic phenomenology. So you do not bracket your biases, your presumptions when you interpret your transcripts or your narratives. Okay, so amo na siya. That's your hermeneutic phenomenology. So there are three main steps process of hermeneutic phenomenology. So the researcher, first na step diri is your naive reading. Okay? The researcher reads all the interviews individually to gain a sense of the whole text. Okay? So actually, tama ni siya ka toxic. Actually, ang first stage gid, kiliwat-liwaton mo ginabasa ang transcripts. Kaya at first, hindi mo pa na iya mag-gets gid. Second, do so-so. Third, do okay na. Depende. Okay? Kung saan mo mag-grasp ang whole context sang transcripts ng imong participants. The other method is, the second method or the second step is structural analysis or interpretive reading. It involves identifying patterns of meaningful connection. Okay? So once you have grasped, okay, the main essence or the main sense of the whole text, then you identify patterns and meaningful connections. Then next, after, we have your interpretation of the whole. So it follows and involves reflecting on the initial reading along with the interpretive reading to ensure a comprehensive understanding of the findings. Okay, then after that, you interpret it as a whole. Okay, you do exhaustive description. Okay, you look into the full picture of the themes that you have generated. Okay, so these are the 6 core steps in your phenomenology. So we also have here the 2 types of your phenomenology. Okay, we have your Husserl's descriptive and Heidegger's interpretive phenomenological research. So amo ni siya si Husserl's mathematician siya. Okay. Then, iyang student, si Heidegger. Okay? So, in your descriptive phenomenology, so the proponent for this is Edmund Husserl, a German mathematician. Your descriptive phenomenology is also known as your transcendental or empirical or psychological phenomenology. Okay? So, amuna, kung makakita ka sang transcendental, meaning descriptive phenomenology na siya. Kung makakita ka sang empirical, it is descriptive phenomenology na siya. When you use, kung makakita ka psychology, it's a descriptive phenomenology na siya. Okay? So here, in your descriptive phenomenology, suspension of all suppositions was related to consciousness and was based on the meaning of individuals' experiences. That means we perform here bracketing. Gina-bracket naton. Okay, gina-bracket ta ang aton experiences, ang aton knowledge about a particular topic. So the question here in your descriptive phenomenology is, what do we know as persons? Okay, that means we do not know anything, we do not know a particular topic, ano lang gid ang nabalaan ta about dira. Okay? That means wala kita naga impose ang aton ng own knowledge, own interpretation, and own consciousness about the topic. So everyday conscious experiences were described, while preconceived opinions were set aside or bracketed. Okay, so that's your descriptive phenomenology. Okay? You just describe the phenomenon without imposing your own interpretation or knowledge in the interpretation phase of their phenomenology. Okay. On the other hand, we have your Heidegger's or interpretive phenomenology. The proponent for this is Martin Heidegger, okay? Husserl student. So, gin-reject niya ang ang descriptive phenomenology, okay? So, iyan naman din nga question is, what is being? That means we have a prior knowledge, and that prior knowledge should aid on the interpretation of the experiences of our participants. So, he is interested in interpreting and describing human experience, believed that bracketing was not warranted because hermeneutic presumed prior understanding. Okay? So, supporter ni siya yan ni hermeneutic phenomenology, si interpretive phenomenology. Okay? Because you are allowed to impose your own knowledge, your own biases, your own presupposition in the interpretation of the transcript of your participants. So our understanding of the everyday world is derived from our interpretation of it. Okay? So that's your interpretive phenomenology. So now you will be asking, when would a researcher choose to use either Husserl's descriptive or Heidegger's interpretive phenomenology? Okay? So you are now to decide kung anong gamiton mga phenomenology, descriptive or interpretive. Okay? So, if you want to use interpretive phenomenology, it is used when a research question asks for the meaning of the phenomenon and the researcher does not bracket their biases and prior engagement with the question. Okay? So, for example, if you know something about a topic, okay, for example, you are a nurse, and the topic that you want to study is about spiritual care, and you have knowledge about spiritual care, so you would probably use interpretive phenomenology because your interpretation, because your knowledge about spiritual care can increase the depthness of the interpretation of your results. Okay, so you will use interpretive phenomenology if you have a prior knowledge to a particular topic. However, when you use descriptive phenomenology, it is used when the researcher wants to describe the phenomenon under study. Okay? So, and brackets their biases. So, kung wala kami nabalaan sa topic na and you want to study that particular topic, so you'd probably use descriptive phenomenology. Okay? Wala ka man actually may ma-contribute, okay, sa amo na nga topic. And also, if you want to bracket your own personal biases, so you would use descriptive phenomenology. Okay? Because the goal of your descriptive phenomenology is just to describe the phenomenon or just to describe the experiences of your participants. Okay, now let's proceed to your data generation. So first, we have your purposive sampling. Okay, your qualitative study in general, okay, uses a purposive sampling. Okay, that means selects participants for study participation based on their particular knowledge of a phenomenon. Okay, and you need to establish inclusive criteria. So you have, as a researcher, you have the liberty, the freedom to choose your participants. Make sure that you have established an inclusion criteria. Okay, so if you will be studying about spiritual care, so of course you would look for a participants who are practicing or who are doing spiritual care. Okay, so hindi ka mangita sa participants nga wala ga obra sang spiritual care. Okay, wala na siya may maihambal about sa spiritual care. So you look for a participants nga best fit gid sa imo nga topic. Okay? So you have to really delineate it in your inclusion criteria. Usually like age, you set the age, you set the male or female, ano na siya, or something like that. It's more of a criteria kung ano imo nga participants. Okay? That's your inclusion criteria. Very important in a qualitative study. Okay? In determining your subject participants. Next is interviews. Okay? So as what I have said, your interviews can be unstructured. That means you don't have a guide questions. Okay? You just go to your participants, then you do interviews through a conversational manner. Or you can have your semi-structured. Okay? That means you have guide questions. So you interview the participants. Okay? From time to time, nagaglance ka sa imo nga interview questions if may kulang pa or may i-follow up ka nga question. Okay? So you could either use unstructured and semi-structured interviews. So and also you use open-ended questions. Okay? So example, you would ask your participants, what comes to your mind when you hear the word commitment? Okay? So that is an open-ended question and that is not an imposing question. Okay? So damo-damo na nga mga ihambal sa imo ang participants. Okay? Kaglain-lain na ilang responses. If you have 5 participants, so probably ang 5 na participants may lain na sila nga sabat when you ask this question. Then how is it like to be a teenage mother? Okay? Teenage mother. So, amo ni siya ang mga examples of an open-ended question and a very good question to start with sa imo nga interview. Okay? Because you will be eliciting a lot of experiences, a lot of views and insights by asking this. Okay? Galing ang problema diri sa aton nga interviews, sometimes we ask imposing questions. So what do I mean when we say imposing questions? Okay? So, for example, nag-ask ka sa participants mo nga, ma'am, ano kasakit ang pain? Okay, nga nabatsyagan mo during labor. Okay? So, imposing na siya. Because in the first place, wala pa kahambal ang participant mo nga naka-experience sa pain. So, gin-impose mo na nga may pain siya, kag iparate mo siya sang pain. So, probably you would ask, ma'am, what are your challenges or what are your difficulties experienced during your labor and delivery? Okay? So, that would be a great question ihambal mo. It is not imposing. Okay, when we say challenges and difficulties, there are a lot of challenges. May it be sa pain, financial, psychological. Okay, these are the aspects na ihambal sa participants mo. Depende sa ilang experiences. Okay? Do not impose questions sa imong participants. Okay? Kaya kung i-impose mo na ang imong question, that means sa imo na nga ulihing interpretation, you are sure that ang magwa dira nga result is about pain. Kaya git-impose mo siya mo sa umpisa pa lang. Okay? So make sure that when you ask question, you ask broad and open-ended questions. Okay? Because we do not know yet the result of our study. Okay? The result of our study depends on the individual experiences of our participants. Okay? And your interview ends if description are exhausted. Okay? So, paano tamabalaan nga we will stop na sa aton interview. Okay? This is quite controversial. Okay? Kung saan o kita ma-end sa aton interview. Okay? It is more of a subjective na feeling. Okay? once you think you have saturated or once you have exhausted all the information na needed mo sa participants, that's the time you end the interview. Okay? However, there are chances man, for example, nag-end ka bi interview mo, the following day, once you have read the transcripts, matyagan mo, may kulang pagid, so you can freely communicate sa imo man nga participants and you ask further questions. That's collaboration. Okay? Makollaborate ka. You can ask, can verify man sa imo nga participants. Okay? So that means there is no end, okay, sa inyong interview sa isa lang ka moment or sa isa lang ka instance. You can actually communicate again sa imong participants if you have clarifications or questions pa nga i-ask sa ila. Okay? So that's for your interview. So what is the data saturation point? This is also another controversial man nga topic in your phenomenological study. Okay? So data saturation point. So saan mo ma-identify nga saturated ka na sa data? So if there is no new themes or essences have emerged from the participants and the data are repeating, predetermination of the number of participants is impossible. Okay? So in your data saturation point, this applies to the number of participants that you are to interview or that you want to participate sa imong study. Okay? So sa pre-oral defense mo na, in a phenomenological study, you will not give, supposed to be, hindi ka dapat maghambal sa number of participants kung pila ka participants ang kinahanglan mo sa study mo. It depends on the data saturation point. Okay? When we say data saturation point, for example, you have participant 1, okay? You have interviewed participant 1, you have interviewed participant 2, okay? May new nga experience, may new nga stories, for example. Sa participant 3, may new pagid nga stories. Sa participant 4, may ara pagid bag-o nga stories. Pag interview sa participant 5, daw parariya, daw iya nga experience, daw gasulit-sulit lang, okay, sa 4 ka participants. So that's the time kada wala ka na din may na detect or wala ka na may nabalaan nga new experience sa participant 5. So that's the time you have to stop sa ika-5th mo nga participant. Okay? That means you have saturated the data. You have reached the data saturation point. So that means sa imong study, there will be 5 participants. Okay? Okay? So, as what I have said in making your proposal, hindi mo pa na ma-determine kung pila ka participants. You would determine that once you have conducted the interviews. Okay? So, tama siyang controversial because it is more of a subjective, okay? Sa imo man Japon nga researcher mo, kung pamatyagan mo yan na saturate mo na, so ma-end ka na, okay? Pero you really have to defend that nga nag-end ka. Okay? Nag-end ka because you have already reached the data saturation point. Ang pinakalas nga participant ka na interview mo, ang iyang responses the same lang sa iban nga participants nga na-interview mo na. Then you decided to stop looking for the participants. So that is your data saturation point. Now let's have your ethical considerations. So very important to have an informed consent. Okay, even in sa quantitative study, may informed consent man. Here in your qualitative study, you really have your informed consent. And I think ang consent diri, ang ethical consideration sa imong qualitative study is a lot needed, okay? Mas grabe siya as compared to your quantitative study. Because most of the topics in your qualitative study are sensitive. Okay, tama, wala ka sensitive. And it pertains ethical considerations. Okay? So very important that you secure that one. And if you want to interview, for example, ang mga sa mga balay-balay or sa iban pa, you really have to interpret. For example, you have an English nga informed consent, maobra ka man sa hiligay no, ng informed consent. Okay? So, make sure na na-interpret mo sa language nila, kag na-interpret mo sa English ang imong informed consent. Issues of privacy, okay? And use of pseudonyms or participants' identity. Okay? Especially when you make your narrative inquiry, of course, you would start with the name of the participants, okay? Mrs., for example, Mrs. Margaret, okay? So, if ang iyang name Margaret, islan mo na siya, okay? So, pseudonyms. The same goes with the phenomenology. If you want to mention names of your participants, you look for pseudonyms or, for example, initials na lang. Okay? This is part of the ethical consideration in making your qualitative study. Now let's proceed to your data treatment. So in your data treatment, you use open-ended interviewing techniques, okay? Open-ended questions. Ang ganito. And you can also use tape recordings, okay? Record mo da ang ilang during the interview. Verbatim transcripts, okay? Follow-up or second interview. Ang mga ginahamba ko sa inyo, for example, sa first mong interview may kulang pa, you can do follow-up interviews, okay? After. Then journaling. Okay, what is journaling? It is a reductive process. So you write down any ideas, feelings, or responses that emerge during data collection. So nag-interview ka be. Okay, nag-interview ka sa participants mo. Then after sang interview mo sa participants mo, you write down ang mga ideas na nagsulod sa mind mo or mga things nga na-mention mo be, for example, which you think nga maka-impose sa experiences ng mga participants. Okay? Kaya once nasulat mo na ang mga ideas and feelings, you would compare that sa imong transcript. Biglang tawon mo kung base bala gin-impose mo gid man ang amo lang experience or you have imposed your bias. Okay? This is just to check that the transcripts of your participants really reflects their own experiences, not your own biases or experiences. Also, we have your data analysis. So it aims to preserve the uniqueness of each participant's lived experience while permitting an understanding of the phenomenon under investigation. So identification and extraction of the significant statements. So amo to ginubrata nga we have extracted the significant statements from the interview transcripts. Okay? An exhaustive description of the phenomenon. Okay? So we look into connections between themes and sub-themes, for example, and have a full picture of the phenomenon or the whole experience of your participants. So I have here an example of your data analysis. So this is an actual transcript from my research. Okay, so this is actually I have 5 themes. Okay, so this is just the theme 1. Okay, theme 1 sa. Okay, so we have here the significant statements. Okay, so what I did is number coded ko sila. So 1 here means participant number 1. The point 1 here represents the first statement of the participants in the interview transcripts. Okay, so I have grouped the significant statements from the actual transcript of my participants. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.9. So group ko na sila because I believe this refers to one concept. Okay, and out of these 3 na significant statements, I have formulated my meanings. Okay. What is the meaning of these 3 significant statements? Okay? Then sa next naman, okay, 2, that means sa participant 2 ni siya naghalin na transcript. 4.3, that means sa participant number 4 kung ni siya naghalin na transcript. Okay? Then I have group this, then make a formulated meanings. So amo na siya mag-ubra sa inyong significant statements going to your formulated meanings. Okay? Then, once you have your formulated meanings, so may mga formulated meanings ka na diri, you have to group your formulated meanings. Okay? Ang may the same thought bala or the same essence. So, i-group mo na sila. Okay? Pagka-group nyo, kuhaon mo naman ang imo nga sub-themes. Okay? So, sa amo nga formulated, sa duwa ni ka-formulated meanings, ang iya nga sub-theme is extending oneself beyond nursing care. Okay? This is your sub-theme. Then, the same goes sa iban pa. Okay? Then once you're done, okay? So once you're done with the sub-themes, so i-group mo naman ang sub-themes mo like this. Gin-group ko ang sub-themes ko. So we have your extending oneself beyond nursing care, making them feel of my presence and building relationship. Then gin-group ko siya and I made my major theme, which is spiritual care is creating connection. So basically, these 3 themes speak about spiritual care as connection, as creating connection. Okay? And also, sa dalom sa imong sub-themes, gin-summarize ko ang mga things nga, ang mga transcripts or essences under that. So this one, giving hope and blah 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 and all. Okay? So amo na siya. So basically ang technique is group, cluster until makuha mo ang pinaka-end. Okay? So that's why it is called your inductive methodology. So basically here is so overall amo ni siya nga akon nga themes nga na-generate. So I have my sub-themes, okay? Then I have my major themes. So in my major themes, amo ni siya ang akong nga final result. Okay, amo siya. Hindi ko na ni siya ma-deduce, okay? Hindi ko na ni siya ma-induce pagid. Okay? Kaya wala na sila sa commonalities. Okay? So amo ni siya ang akong nga major themes. Okay? So by the way, as a general rule in your qualitative study, the lesser the number of your themes, the better ang imo nga study. That means na exhaust mo ang imo description. Okay? Kay kung for example, if you have 10 nga themes, 15, 20 nga themes, that means wala mo pa na siya na exhaust ang imo nga description. Maybe there are common nga mga concepts or common nga themes nga pwede pa siya ma-merge together. Okay? So again, the lesser the themes you have, for example, better mga 3 lang, okay, better mga 4 lang, imo nga themes 5. Okay, that means you have exhausted the description of the experiences of your participants. So these are the major themes of the study. Okay, so now let's proceed to the review of the literature. So postponing the literature review is related to the goal of achieving a pure description of the phenomenon under investigation. Okay, so at first, dapat kung magkanda ka sa qualitative study, hindi ka na magbasa sa imo nga review of related literature because that would contribute to your knowledge on the specific topic, and the tendency is i-impose mo na sa imo nga patient, sa imo nga participant when you do interviews. Okay? So ang obrahon mo lang diri in your related interview is you do your cursory review. Okay? Cursory review. That means i-check mo lang kung how to go about with the process in making your study. Okay? You do not read about related studies regarding the topic. You do not read about concept related to your topic. Less likely, researchers' bias will influence the study. Okay? If you do postponing the review of related literature. Then once data analysis is complete, the researchers review the literature to place the findings within the context of what is already known about the topic. So this time sa review of related literature, once you're done with the data analysis, naka-come out ka na sa imong final findings, that's the time you go back to your review of related literature. Then you relate your study findings to the related studies conducted before, okay, or conducted by other authors before, and also you relate your theoretical framework. Okay, so amo na siya. Okay, so it's like you're interpreting if you agree or if you refute a particular findings of the study. Okay, so that's how you go about with the review of related literature. Next, let's discuss about trustworthiness and rigor of the study. Okay, so this is very important man. Okay, kaya amo gini usually ang ginalantaw sa mga panelists on how you would go about with the trustworthiness, credibility, and rigor of the study. Okay, this makes your study scientific. Okay, reliable, credible, and dependable. Okay, first we have here credibility. It includes activities that increase the probability that credible findings will be produced. Okay, and member checking technique, returning to the participants to see whether they recognize the findings. So one way to make sure that your study is credible is by way of member checking technique. So as what I have said, once the study findings are derived, so you go back to your participants. You let them see your findings, then you ask them if it really reflects their own experiences. Okay? That makes your study credible. Next is dependability. It is a criterion met once researchers have demonstrated the credibility of the findings. how dependable are these results? Okay, dependable ba lang yung imong results? So in order to help you para maging dependable yung mga results, you need to use the triangulation technique. Okay? So ang triangulation technique, amo ni siya ang paggamit, okay, when you use a lot of data collection assessment or data collection methods like interviews, like looking for documents, looking for by way of observation, or by way of asking significant others related to the experience. Okay, that means you are actually making sure that your study is dependable. And remember, no dependability without credibility. Okay. Next is confirmability. It is a process criterion. So in your confirmability, you need to have your audit trail. It is a recording of the activities over time that another individual can follow. So basically, maubra ka na sa mga procedures, okay, that you have undertaken, okay, that you have undertaking in analyzing or interpreting your study. Okay? So ipakita mo na sa ila ano ang mga procedures na ginubra mo, ano ang mga interpretations na ginubra mo, okay? That is your audit trail. Just to make sure that others who want to study parehas sa imo ginubra could actually follow through, okay, with the procedures that you have undertaken in making your research. And lastly, we have your transferability, okay? It is the probability that the study findings have meanings to others in similar situation, also been labeled as fittingness. Okay? So for example, if you have studied regarding spiritual care in a particular institution and you have 5 participants, so ang imo na nga study about the experiences of nurses nga nagahatag spiritual care is the same man sa mga nurses nga nagahatag spiritual care which are not included in your study. Okay? So ang imong findings ma-transfer mo sa ila, okay? Sa ibang nga group of people in the same institution, in the same setting. Okay? So that's your credibility, dependability, confirmability, and transferability. Okay? So these are the elements that you need to take into consideration in order for your study to be trustworthy and should undergo a rigorous methodology or rigorous checking. Okay, so in terms of the credibility, so I mentioned regarding member checking technique. Okay, so you go back to your participants, you ask them if the findings reflects their own experiences. So in order to document this, you can actually make a confirmation of study findings bala nga sulat so that ipapermahan mo sa ila just an evidence nga they have understood and they agree that this reflects their own experiences. Okay? So papermahan mo na sa ila, then you can present that to the panelists if they ask if you have performed member checking technique, okay, in your study. Okay, so you can use this way of confirming the study findings from your participants. Next is presenting data. So how do we present a qualitative research data? So according to Sandelowski, there is no one style of reporting the findings of a qualitative research study. So you can present this through themes, okay? Ma-themes ka, mubra ka sa thematic analysis. You can present this through stories, narratives. You can present this through, for example, a video presentation, okay? Mga maamo na video presentation, usually sa mga panel, okay? Mga conferences, they usually make a video presenting the results of their study. And you can also make a graphical representation or a graphic medium representation in a photography, okay, picture. So this is to enhance the sharing, sharing the richness of the data. Okay. So in my study, I have presented my data through thematic analysis as well as through a graphical representation. Okay. So I made a representation, okay, picture, okay, regarding the experiences of nurses on the spiritual care. So you can use this one, okay? And also you need to explain why did you make this image or graphical representation representing the spiritual care of the patient, of the participant, sorry, of the participant. So you can make use of this. This is to add up to the richness or in-depthness of your study or of your findings. Okay. And before I end this presentation, so let me just share to you this the goal of most qualitative study. So the goal of most qualitative studies is not to generalize, but rather to provide a rich contextualized understanding of some aspects of human experience through the intensive study of particular cases. Okay? That means ang imo diya nga research sa qualitative study, we could not generalize this to all populations. Okay? For example, we could not generalize the result of my study about spiritual care to all nurses who give spiritual care. Okay? Hindi siya generalizable. Your qualitative study is not generalizable. Okay? As compared to your quantitative and experimental and random trial na lang mga studies, so they can be generalized into a particular group of people or population. But in your qualitative study, it is not generalizable. Okay? This is one of the limitation of your qualitative study. Because the experience of nurses during that time, naging kolekto sila, might not be the same sa experiences sa mga nurses naging kolekto sa 2022. Okay, kung mag-interview ko, malain ang ilang experiences. Okay? Because there are a lot of factors na malain ang ilang experience. Okay? There are a lot of environmental factors na mag-change ila experience. So for now, sa gin-search ko to, amo to ang experience sang mga nurses during that time period, during the time being which I interviewed them. Okay? So, again, it's not generalizable. Okay? So that's the limitation of your qualitative study. But what is good about qualitative study is you get into the depthness, the meaning of a human experience. Okay? Mabalaan mo nga aga amo ni ang isa ka tawo. Okay, because amo ni siya. Okay? So that's an intensive study in your qualitative study. So it's not generalizable. So I believe that would be all for our discussion. So I hope this helped you in your future endeavors in making your thesis.